Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. We're visiting with our friend Paula Gates from Pathway Caring for Children. Good morning.
Good morning, Susie.
Paula, you've been there a while.
I have, over 28 years.
Wow. Well, how long has Pathway Caring for Children been in existence?
We're going to be celebrating our 45th anniversary coming up here in another year yet.
That's amazing. And you've been there for 28
Right.
of those.
Yes.
For those who might be new in the area, tell us a little bit about Pathway, what it is, how it all got started.
Well, Pathway got started almost 45 years ago now by Jim and Velma Bridges, who saw the need for children to have families. And they started with a group home for boys, actually coming from delinquency. And it's built into now, almost 45 years later. Our main areas are mental health, adoption, and foster care. And we have 4 satellite offices, and office in Canton is our main office.
And you are a social worker by training?
I'm a social worker, yes.
So your position there is what?
I'm Director of Adoption and Kinship Services.
Okay, and kinship services is what we're wanting to talk about today. Something that seems to be a new trend. I have more and more friends who are grandparents who are stepping into the role of parenting. So first of all, let's talk about kinship and what that is, and then what this new trend might be telling us.
Well, kinship is when grandparents or aunts and uncles are raising relatives' children. So, grandparents raising their grandchildren, that's what we usually think of. But, I have a great aunt who's raising her great nephew and getting into other relative situations too. But it's when the parents are not able to parent that the relatives step in and take over this role of parenting.
Are they just stepping in, or do they get are they legally adopted? Are they legally the guardian? Legally the parent?
Yeah, that's a good question. And they become legally the parent in most cases, which might be custodial parent, and they also might choose to adopt. And, those are 2 different situations. There's benefits of taking adoption, but parents oftentimes have to agree to that. So that might be, there can be obstacles in the way of adopting.
Adopting can be tricky when you don't know the biological parent.
Right.
But when the biological parent is a relative, perhaps even your own child, what does that do to that relationship?
Well, those family relationships all change. I have grandparents who have lost contact with their children because of parenting the grandchildren. It becomes strained. They have to come up with maybe a visitation plan. Maybe there's no contact for that parent with the children that the grandparents are parenting, and so there's so much less contact or maybe no contact actually with the grandparents and their children. So at least, it's strained. Maybe the parent comes back into the home and wants to be the parent, but here the grandparents have taken charge and they're the legal parent now. So it can be very complicated.
The other thing that comes to mind is the fact that how much fun it is to be a grandparent. Okay, and please, I will apologize now for this. It's just a quote. I thought it was kind of funny. I'm going to repeat it. Please don't call or send in letters. But someone once said, grandparenting is your reward for not having killed your children.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes.
And I thought it was funny, but it is kind of like playtime. It's the time where you're not the parent. You don't, I mean, it's not like you go against the wishes of the parent or you go against their rules, but the rules are a little relaxed around grandma and grandpa, and that's when you can go have ice cream before dinner and just fun things. What does that do when suddenly you're not that person anymore? You have to be the disciplinarian. And what does that do to the whole grandparenting fun?
Yes, our poor grandparents that come to us in our kinship services often say they've lost being able to be a grandparent to their grandchild because they've had to take on this parenting role, which includes discipline, correction, and, helping kids do homework and keeping them on their routines. And it just is a different role than what they expected to have with their grandchildren, of being, just like you said, being able to be relaxed and enjoy having fun times together. That usually in those cases, the kids go home
Exactly, when you're tired.
Yes, and in these cases, the grandparents are the parents, the parental figures, and the kids don't go home, and it's exhausting for our grandparents.
Let's pick up on that word, exhausting. How in the world, 30 years after parenting your kid, when you were having your children, now fast forward 30 years later, you're a little older, and it would be harder to get up in the middle of the night with a sick kid and be where you need to be. And just physically, it's demanding. How are they doing this?
Yes, it's very difficult on our grandparents who are raising their grandkids just to have a break from them. Oftentimes they don't have extended family who can help. And then how do they get a break? How can this child go stay at somebody else's house for a while so they can get the rest they need? And I'd say probably all the grandparents I work with, they have chosen this. They have committed their lives to parenting their grandchild because they see this as the best option in this situation, but they're exhausted, they're overwhelmed, and don't get the self-care that they need.
We see some great success stories. I'm thinking of the Olympic gymnast who was raised by her grandparents. So what a wonderful relationship they seem to have, and she certainly has done well. But it just seems like it's got to be so hard. And so far what we've talked about mostly is like, oh my gosh, what a bummer. There's got to be a positive side, and the part that Pathway plays in getting people ready to step into this all-important role and to have some success. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think of families I've worked with, and all of them embrace this role. They've made a choice about it, and they're positive about it, which is amazing based on the circumstances. They have children who have now come from trauma because the reason they can't live with parents is usually because something's happened in that family: abuse, neglect, abandonment, often drug-related. I have one child at 2 years old. His mother died of an overdose and then went to live with his great-aunt. And this great-aunt was telling me that the family was sitting together and talking about, who can take this child, and they all were naming her name. And she felt like she had to do this, but now she sees, well, who else would have done it, and it's my job to do this. The grandparents that I work with, they are pretty amazing about how they have taken this on as now their mission, to help these children to have a secure life and stability. And they see that as that's the best thing they can give these children. As far as the services that Pathway has for kinship families, I will say, thinking of Stark County and surrounding areas, there are not a lot of services designed for kinship families or adoptive families. I've talked about that lots of times. But thinking especially for kinship families, understanding their specific challenges that they have, connecting them with other grandparents or aunts and uncles who understand the specific challenges they have. And we have a support group that meets once a month on the first Tuesday of the month from 10 to noon, just for kinship families, for kinship parents. We have childcare provided. If needed, it's between 10 and noon on the first Tuesday of the month at Pathway. And those grandparents, aunts and uncles can get together and share their common concerns. I facilitate that group, and it's a real privilege to be part of these parents' lives who have given up what they could have had. And I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things they do mention. They didn't expect this. This is unexpected parenting, and it was sort of put in their lap as their responsibility, but now they choose this. And I often remind them, you do have a choice. And they, at that point, decide, they are going to do this because they have a choice and they need resources to help them. We provide this support group. We add them in with our adoptive moms for our adoptive and kinship mothers breakfast group that we have once a month on Saturdays, the second Saturday of the month. We also specialize in helping kinship families as far as our therapy, our mental health services, we have case management, we have individual and family counseling. We also do a service called Family Empowerment for our kinship families to help them parent traumatized children in a different way, trying to build that trust and connection that these children are missing.
I want to go back to that word choice, because there's a mental adjustment that takes place, isn't there? Yes. When I'm thinking of the great aunt who everybody points to her, you're the one, you're the likely person. There's a difference between feeling that a new role is being thrust upon you and then deciding, wait a minute, and having that mental adjustment and saying, oh no, I want to do this. This is a new purpose. This is my new purpose.
Yes.
What takes place? How do you get from point one to point B?
Well, one thing that does help our grandparents or aunts and uncles that are doing this is to get counseling for themselves. And I really encourage our grandparents, our kinship families, our parents that are doing this to get counseling for themselves, to work through this loss, really losing what they expected for perhaps their retirement years, of really, running after children, taking them to activities, being involved in school again, and those losses that they had where they thought maybe they'd spend their winters in Florida or something.
Yes.
And also the challenges that these children present them are often a surprise. Because of the trauma that they've been through, because of the loss of their own parents and feelings of abandonment. And so, counseling for these kinship parents can be really helpful, besides counseling for the kids and the family piece to help these families to work through their problems together.
There's so many directions I want to go with you. Let's take right now the fact that parents might be approaching this, the grandparent as parent or the kinship parent as parent, might be taking this with a little trepidation because they might be feeling like, wow, I really messed up the first time. How do I do this again or now? Or do many of them come to you having had a complete transformation of their life, saying, I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago. I want to do this right this time. What do you see? Because I think that would be a scary thing. You see your own children going a direction and making terrible choices, and there would be a fear, I think, in the flesh. There would be a fear about what will I do to the next generation now?
Right. Well, I think there's fear, and a lot of guilt. Here my children have messed up, and they're in big trouble. They can't even be a parent to their child. And so, grandparents stepping in but thinking, can I do any better? Can I do better than I did the last time? And I want to say that when children mess up as adults, these parents who can't parent their children, it's not always the parent's fault. And that's important too, and that's something we help grandparents or aunts and uncles to look at. Your responsibility as a parent and the success is that you do the best you can to do the right thing in parenting. That doesn't mean your kids are always going to turn out right. But often grandparents think of being able to parent their grandkids as a second chance to do it differently. And I would say they think it's going to be easier than it is often, and they find that they need more help than they thought they did.
Do they put too much pressure on themselves to do it right this time? Or too much pressure on the children?
Oh, both of those things. Too much pressure on themselves. I have to be perfect. I have to do it right. Often they don't have the patience that they would have had for children as grandparents. It's hard to have patience when you're tired and when you're worn out and when you're running, when you didn't, have this kind of energy younger, and now you have to have it when you're older. And often, the grandparents can get grouchy and irritable and not be very tolerant of behaviors. So we try to help grandparents, kinship parents, to learn how to have patience, take care of themselves so they can have more patience for these children who really are coming from a very hard place.
Mm-hmm. Before we go to the break, I have to quote Dr. Ray Guarendi at this point because he's saying basically what kids need, what children need is us. So good parents make way more mistakes than bad parents just because they're with their kids more.
Yes, and
isn't that wisdom?
That would be one of our philosophies too, is that what your children, any children, need most is the parent to be there emotionally, to have that emotional presence with the child. And we try to teach our grandparents, adoptive parents, we try to teach them how to be there, how to connect with their children, how to let go of their own agendas, their own rigidity, to be more flexible, to really be present for their children, to give their children voice, to build trust, and just to be there. And one of the things I tell parents is just say, I'm here for you.
We're with Paula Gates from Pathway Caring for Children. Going to take a short break. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community.